what a showing. Stacy Sims is definitely a known entity, and we are very, very happy to have her here with us today. She's been very, very generous with her time. She spent some time this morning with our graduate students and some faculty and did a journal club and talked about her journey from where she started to where she is today. She had a lunchtime talk, a Q&A, for our faculty and staff on campus. That was packed in over in Cheney A and B. So that was a wonderful event. We had dinner together with some friends, and now it leads us to the Peter Karpovich lecture, which is an annual event for us. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about Peter Karpovich before I introduce Stacy, and to let you know a little bit about the legacy that he has given to Springfield College and the reason that we have this lecture tonight. My name is Sue Geyer, and I am the Dean of the School of Physical Education, Performance and Sports Leadership. I've been in this role for about 6 years, and before that I was in the Department of Exercise Science and Athletic Training, and all together I've been at Springfield College for about 25 years. One of the best decisions I've ever made in my life was to come to this institution, and it's events like this that continue to remind me of how lucky we are to be at a place like Springfield College, who not only attracts individuals, but as you will know, she is one of our alum. We have really, really good students, and that's something that I knew from the first day I got here. And our students leave, and they do really good things, and today's a case in point of that. So I'll get to the introduction to Stacy in a minute. But for those who are not familiar with this event, it's really to honor Peter V. Karpovich, who came to Springfield College, and he was an exercise physiologist. And just let me have a few minutes to talk about the event and his legacy that he left. Each year, Springfield College hosts what we call the Karpovich Lecture. The purpose of this lecture is to bring a distinguished lecturer in the field of exercise science or other scientific aspect to the college on an annual basis. The lecture seeks to present a stimulating intellectual encounter for students, faculty, staff, alumni, as well as interested members of the community. I don't know how many phone calls we got when we put out Stacy's information, but it was copious, and my administrative assistant was extremely busy saying, yes, please come, yes, please come. And you did. The lecture is named after Peter V. Karpovich, a former faculty member and pioneer in exercise physiology. Dr. Karpovich received a medical degree and served as a physician at the Red Cross Hospital in Russia and was appointed surgeon at the Military School of Physical Education in 1921. Dr. Karpovich joined Springfield College faculty in 1927 as a professor of physiology. He assumed duties as the director of health education in 1947 and was appointed research professor of physiology in 1955. Dr. Karpovich authored more than 130 scientific articles on physical training and its effect on energy expenditure and athletics, and he was a fellow of the American Academy of Physical Education and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Additionally, he was a member of the American Association of Health, Physical Education and Recreation, as well as the Royal Society of Health, the American Psychological Society, and the New York Academy of Science. Dr. Karpovich and his wife, Josephine Rathborn, were among the founders of the American College of Sports Medicine. Matter of fact, his wife was the only female who was on that board of 11 others. So here's to women's power. And the chairman was Dr. Karpovich himself, and he was the chairman of research. He was the president at ACSM from 1961 to 62 and was presented the Organization Honor Award. Dr. Karpovich is considered by many to be the father of exercise physiology in the United States. Now that you've heard about the father of exercise physiology, I would like to introduce what I'm now going to consider the mother of exercise physiology, Dr. Stacy Sims. A while back, I was sent a podcast And the guest of that podcast was a forward-thinking international exercise physiologist and nutrition scientist whose aim was to revolutionize exercise nutrition and performance for women, Dr. Stacy Sims. Before I tell you more, I want to thank someone who actually sent me the podcast, and I'm going to thank her with an autographed book by Dr. Stacy Sims, and that is someone who flew up from Florida to see tonight's presentation. It's Ginny Holder's niece, Jenny, who is going to get the book tonight. So I thank her and blame her all at the same time. So after I listened to the podcast, I was immediately captivated and admittedly curious to find out more about Dr. Stacy Sims. So as any good researcher would do, what did I do? I Googled you. I found out that she had directed research programs at Stanford, Auckland University, and the University of Waikato, focusing on female health and performance and pushing to improve research on women's health. I found her website, drstacysims.com, and I was amazed by the number of materials she created focused on women training across the lifespan. So I said, okay, so has she published anything though? So for this, had to upgrade my search a little bit, and I included ResearchGate. And when I went to ResearchGate, I found out that she had over 100 peer-reviewed papers and is regularly featured speaker at professional and academic conferences. I also had the opportunity to watch, along with about 1 million other individuals, her TED Talk titled "Women Are Not Small Men," which focused on challenging the existing dogma of women in exercise, nutrition, and health. Oh, yeah, she also wrote 2 books. So Roar and Next Level, both we have in the back, and she is going to be staying after and sign either the ones that you can purchase or ones that you brought. I said, would you mind doing this? She goes, absolutely. So currently, Dr. Sims holds a senior research position with the Sport Performance Research Institute in New Zealand. She is an adjunct professor with the Stanford Lifestyle Medicine Group. She supervises PhD students, writes academic papers, and is on the advisory board for several cutting-edge companies. Sims attended Purdue University for her undergrad and received a PhD from the University of Otago in New Zealand. She has also held postdoc positions for Stanford Research Center. But it was her master's degree in exercise physiology at Springfield College that opened the door to the invitation for her to come back and to be this year's Springfield College Peter V. Karpovich Lecturer. I will be forever grateful to who I found out today pushed my random email through a Q&A link that I found on her webpage, and it was her husband who made the connection between Springfield College Dean randomly emailing Stacy Sims from a Q&A, gave it to her, and Stacy immediately reached out and said, I know Peter V. Karpovich Lecturer, I want to come, and she did. It is my great honor to present Dr. Stacy Sims. You got this, or you have a handout?
If I stand here, can you hear me? Yeah. I look around the room like, oh my gosh, so many people. And the one thing that Sue forgot to say is it really started with Dr. Samuel Headley. Because when I landed here, I landed in the athletic training area, and I decided that wasn't really for me. So I transferred over to XPhys, and Sam's like, come on in. And he was very gracious with his time, as he is still now, really mentoring students and looking after students to make sure they get what they want out of the program and guide them in a way that I don't think is very common when you look in academia. And he was someone that kind of pushed me in the right direction and allowed me to look specifically at women when no one else was. So I will still be indebted. Thank you, Sam. a few other points forward. I have made it my academic career to really look at women and sex differences. One, being an athlete and having a raft of professional accolades from that point of view, but also being able to get into a lab and answer questions. So one of the things that we often think about is, where did we come from, or maybe we don't even think about it. And how are we having conversations? How are we holding our body? When we're looking at men versus women, we see that there becomes more of an aggression when we're trying to hold our own as women. But does it really have to be that way, is the big question that I have. So I like to start this with this particular video that I love and hope that will play. Is it working?
Hi, Erin.
Hi.
Okay, so I'm gonna just give you some actions to do. I just do the first thing that comes to mind. Show me what it looks like to run like a girl.
My hair.
Show me what it looks like to fight like a girl. Now throw like a girl.
Aw. My name is Dakota, and I'm 10 years old.
Show me what it looks like to run like a girl. Throw like a girl. Fight like a girl. What does it mean to you when I say run like a girl?
It means run fast as you can.
So do you think you just insulted your sister?
No. I mean, yeah, insulted girls, but not my sister.
Is like a girl a good thing?
Actually, don't know if it's a bad thing or a good thing. It sounds like a bad thing. It sounds like you're trying to humiliate someone.
So when they're in that vulnerable time between 10 and 12, how do you think it affects them when somebody uses like a girl as an insult?
I think it definitely drops their self-confidence and really puts them down, because during that time, they're already trying to figure themselves out. And when somebody says, you hit like a girl, it's like, well, what does that mean? Because they think they're a strong person. It's kind of like telling them that they're weak and they're not as good as them.
And what advice do you have to young girls who are told they run like a girl, kick like a girl, hit like a girl, swing like a girl?
Keep doing it, because it's working. If somebody else says that running like a girl or kicking like a girl or shooting like a girl is something that you shouldn't be doing, that's their problem. Because if you're still scoring and you're still getting to the ball on time and you're still being first, you're doing it right. Doesn't matter what they say. I mean, yes, I kick like a girl and I swim like a girl and I walk like a girl and I wake up in the morning like a girl, because I am a girl. And that is not something that I should be ashamed of. So I'm gonna do it anyway. That's what they should do.
If I asked you to run like a girl now, would you do it differently?
I would run like myself.
Would you like a chance to redo it?
Yeah.
Why can't run like a girl also mean win the race?
So I often use that because it's relatively old, but it still holds very true. To put the context into really, like, how did we get here? What are we doing when we're talking about the discrepancy we have in language? One of the other things I often bring up, especially when we're looking at a gym situation, is what is a girl push-up? Right? On your knees, right? No, that's a modified push-up. But we've been so ingrained to think about it as being a girl push-up because it's lesser than. What is a ladies bar? You go into gyms, right? The 35 kilo is supposedly the ladies bar because it's thinner. No, it's not. It's a lighter bar and thinner for hands that are smaller. But we have these language nuances that are just ingrained in the way that we think. So really, how did we start this? I am a feminist in a way that I like to look at it from a historical perspective. So if we think about initially who was in the room when we started medicine and science design, women were pushed aside for the most part, and I love Darwin, but I also hate him because he said that women had smaller brains, so they weren't necessarily adept to being in the room for thinking. So when we started with medicine and we started with science design, it was men that were in the room. So when we get to men being in the room, that's the default, right? So that's what they're thinking. So when we start getting into more of the history of sport, we know that the original ancient Greek Olympics, no women were allowed. It was absolutely forbidden. And there's a story of a woman who wanted to watch her son compete and went in disguised as a man and found out that she was a woman, and they stoned her to death. That's how prevalent the masculine aggressiveness was in sport. So then when we think about the actual history of sport, do you realize that it was just this past Olympics that we had gender parity in 2024, right? And women haven't really been competing that long in the Olympics because they were not deemed to be strong enough. So if we think about, in the 1900s, only 22 women were there. So we have progressed, but there's still this undercurrent of women aren't good enough. And by the end of my lecture, I hope you realize that I'm not saying that women should be better or worse. It's we are we and men are men, and there are sex differences, yes, but we can advance those sex differences to become advantageous for women, to bring more of a level playing field, to equalize the team and come together to work together. So as I go through this, I also want to bring attention to some of the other pushback we get, not just in the sport and medicine, but from general population. So I love this quote from JFK when they were trying to establish a commission for women to understand healthcare and push women's rights forward. He said, "We want to be sure that women are used as effectively as they can be to provide a better life for our people, getting them out into the workforce, making sure women are healthy, having support. But in addition to meeting their primary responsibility, which is in the home." So here, let's move women forward, but on the undercurrent, let's backlash and say, well, actually, we really need you back in the home in a traditional sense. So we're always fighting this double entendre. So again, if we think about the history and context, this still kind of holds true now when we're looking at scientific design. Because if you're looking and you're up against funding, you're up against a timeline, we tend to always look through the male lens and default to how much time we have and can we do a proper crossover or washout in that time frame. And when you start talking about women and bringing women into it, often you hear, but women are too complex or complicated because of the menstrual cycle or because of perimenopause. So we're not going to necessarily include them. So you start looking at the recruitment language and the posters, and it's very off-putting to women. But it's also primarily because of how we started. Like I said, who was in the room? It was primarily men in the room, so we see the standard is default to men. We see the gender norms for reference standards, VO2 max, right? The VO2 max for women has just been a percentage taken off for men. We see differences in our performance abilities. Again, it's just a smaller percentage that's been taken off from men. So we're looking at how that reference has shaped things. Also, right now, the concern is AI, because we see that AI is being written by male engineers with the lens through that male idea and not taking into the context that women and the nuances of women are slightly different. So again, the other problem is we often assume sex is binary. And I'm very aware that the video that I played at the start is really talking about a cis girl. But what about the other nuances around it? That's not included. So when we look specifically at sports science research, we're still very much behind the game. We see that 35% of participants are female participants, and when you start digging into that, the methodology of this is not necessarily appropriate either. Often we're mixing oral contraceptive pill and natural cycles instead of separating them out, or if we're looking specifically at oral contraceptive pill, we're not really acknowledging that there are different types and formulations that can also have an effect. One of the other problems that we have is the PI and who is the PI on a lot of papers, the primary investigator. We see that less than 30% are women. Part of it is the maternity and the parenthood aspect, where women who come into academia get put back a little bit when they start to have a family. Not by the fault of it, but it's just the system, where men can keep publishing and doing research and progressing, and women will take a little bit of time out to have a family and then come back in. They're behind the 8 ball. So we're starting to see more of that in the published papers. And again, we think about the environment. I've talked about the ingrained cultural stereotypes. We have gender biases and, of course, outright sexism that still exists, even though we're really pushing to level the playing field, so to speak. So what does this really mean in a practical sense? We think about the generalizations that lead to misconceptions. So what someone should look like. I work with some of the Rugby 7 women, and we've done a couple of studies from a sociological perspective, because one of my good friends and colleagues is a sociologist in New Zealand. And one of the things that comes up is, in order to be successful on the rugby field, you have to have a certain amount of muscle, you have to look a certain way, because your sport dictates that to be at a high level as an Olympian. And that's how they look, and that's how they are revered on the field. But then award night comes, and they put on a cocktail dress, and the haters come out. You look like a man. What are you doing? And so their same fans that love and revere them on the field, looking very masculine in sport, will turn around and hate on them when they are in a dress, because it's a dichotic switch of image. So we have to understand what that generalization, that misconception of what do I look like to be successful in my sport versus what does society think I need to look like. And we still have that gender bias and that discrepancy. Then when we start getting into like return to play, we know that concussion guidelines are different, and they should be different for men and women. But yet when you're looking specifically at the guidelines, they don't differentiate. We know that if a woman is hit in the high phase or the high hormone phase of her menstrual cycle, she'll have more post-concussive syndromes that last longer period of time, but that's not necessarily taken into account when we're looking at return to play guidelines. Because it's not written into the guidelines, it's not written into the research, and it's not in the bell curve of normalcy. Injury prevention guidelines as well. We also look at dietary manipulations. When we do an audit of all the supplements that are primarily used in high-performance sport, the efficacy for women is not there, because there are relatively few studies that have been done on popular sport supplements, but yet no one talks about it. Something as simple as nitrates, and we look at it as using as a vasodilator. When we look at premenopausal women or women in their reproductive years using nitrates, it's actually a hindrance to their performance, because the nitrate interferes with our vasomotor aspects as well as the endothelial function of our blood vessels, because nitric oxide is tightly tied to how estrogen makes our endothelial cells respond. But in postmenopausal women and late perimenopausal women, nitrates work great, because we have a reduction in estrogen, so now that exogenous nitrate comes in and helps with vasodilation. So that's the only one that's been really well studied. We look at beta-alanine, there's nothing really there for women. Creatine, now we're getting a large body of evidence for women, but it's only been in the recent past 2 or 3 years. So all the norms that we know, we have to really investigate and say, is it really appropriate for me as a woman where I am in my life, or is it just been generalized over from male data? So I bring this up because when we think about what is success in sport, we have this image that you can't be fallible. We have to have power. We have to be aggressive. We have to show no fear. And these are the messages that are portrayed. So when we think about 20 years ago, which unfortunately that mentality still exists, if a woman were to lose her period, she was deemed to be fit enough to be successful in whatever event was coming up. But we now know that that is a sign that she is not well. But yet we still have this pervasive idea in sport that if you don't have a period, then that means that you are ready to go. And it falls back into having a period or a bleed phase is a fallibility, and we don't want to talk about it. We are starting to see change, which is fantastic. We have more information about it and how it is beneficial, but it still is very much ingrained in the sporting culture because it's deemed as a fallibility that women aren't really that concerned about having it. They'd rather take an oral contraceptive pill so they can ignore it. So again, if we're only using masculine language and only men's sport is shown, especially on prime time, society still gets the impression that that is the norm, then we are still pushing women back. So I want everyone to close their eyes. And I want you to think about a point in time when you were younger, where you might have had an encounter that really stuck with you, that you felt wasn't quite right. For me, I remember when I was 17 and my dad asked me, what do you want to do with your life when you get older? What do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I want to be an Army Ranger or a Navy SEAL. And he said, well, you can't because you are a girl. It was the very first time that I had pushback. Now, if you take it out of the stance of a personal event or something you've said to someone, and let's bring it into the norm now. If we walk into a normal 24-hour fitness, LA fitness, and you're a new person coming in, generally what happens as a woman, they'll say, how much weight do you want to lose? Here's the cardio, here's the list of classes. If you're a guy coming in, they're like, great, how much weight do you want to gain? They're the lifting platforms. Because it's still very gendered. We're still working for it. So what I want people to understand is we are seeing a sea change. One of the sports that I really have a love-hate relationship with is CrossFit. Because one of the first things that CrossFit did was eliminate the whole gender disparity. It's like you have RX, if you're a man or a woman, this is what you do. Equal prize money. And it wasn't, women, you're not strong enough, you can't do this. It was like, yeah, you're strong enough, let's do it. So it opened up a sea change, right? So now we're seeing Olympic lifting becoming more prevalent in a lot of the gyms. So like I said, there are small spaces around. So if we're talking about that, I want people's first thought to be about your beliefs and context and the way that language can shape perceptions. So like I said, what is a girl push-up? A girl push-up is just a push-up. A girl is doing a push-up. What is a modified push-up? On your knees or with a band. So we had to be very aware of the language that we are using, as well as the stance that we have, to create a safe environment. If you're uncomfortable with a woman coming up to you and talking to you about your menstrual cycle or some other things that are deemed girly, if you're standing there like this, it's going to create a very negative environment where even if you're uncomfortable and you have your hands down or behind your back, it opens up that space and allows that conversation. So there are things that we do in our day-to-day life and the language that we use that can really change and create a sea change to be more inclusive and opening up the awareness to allow women to not have to say, wait, I'm a woman, that's why that was said. It just is. We are there, you are there, everyone's involved in the conversation, and we work together to make it better. So where am I going with this? So I want to really acknowledge there are two different things we have to think about when we're looking at sex differences. The first and foremost is the actual chromosomal idea of XX versus XY. And I will apologize because we don't have enough women or research on the XX woman. So the tangential of everything else is not there because we don't have any data to support it. And I hate having to apologize, but unfortunately I am. So when we look specifically at sex differences, we know that there are inherent chromosomal differences at birth. We see that there's differences in muscle morphology. Women are born with more of our type 1 endurant type fibers and less of the glycolytic fibers. As we age, those glycolytic fibers are lost at a more rapid rate. From a neuromuscular perspective, there's differences in muscle firing patterns. And of course, there are differences in the way that exercise metabolism is in women versus men. Women, by the nature of having more endurant fibers, also end up using more free fatty acids as compared to men. From a biomechanical state, we see there's a change in our Q angle. We have differences in our shoulder girdle. We have differences in relative bone lengths, and center of gravity changes as we get older. So is this a bad thing or not, right? So we talk about it, it's not. So if we understand, for example, sex differences in endurance running, if we know that women are more quad dominant, and we know that they're really good fat burners, and we know that we have all these inherent things that make women more endurant, then that's an advantage for women. So let's train the weaknesses. Let's train the power side. Let's train the postural side of things so that we can really build hamstring strength, so that we can start to level the playing field. Where a lot of people look at this and go, oh, yeah, so we see there are these sex differences and we can see a predisposition to injury, we can see a predisposition to XYZ. I look at it and go, okay, I see those weaknesses. I'm going to train them to make it as strong as possible so that we level the playing field. If we had an image of a man up there and we saw the advantages that a male figure has, then we look at his weaknesses of endurance and say, we need to train you in endurance to level the playing field. So it's just a different perspective to take when we're talking about sex differences. But we know that most research really looks at the epigenetic effects of our sex hormones. And the best way I can describe this is we see that we have our primary female hormones of estrogen and progesterone. And what people don't understand outside of the conversation of sex hormones is that estrogen and progesterone affect every system of the body. So if we think about puberty, and we think about what happens, and we've all gone through it or are going through it depending on our age, but most of us probably have gone through it in this room, there are inherent changes that we see. For young girls, this is a very vulnerable point, just like the video said at the start, where the body completely changes. We see a widening of the hips, which changes the Q angle. We see a widening of the shoulder girdle, which changes the way that our arms will be by our side. So no longer are we able to hit the monkey bar and fly. We can't do a pull-up, right? Because of our body shape has changed. And we start to put on belly fat, and we feel really ungangly in what we're doing. We don't feel comfortable running. We don't feel comfortable trying to do monkey bars. There's a lot of things that will inhibit us from achieving our normal physical activity. But if we look at a young boy who's going through puberty, they start to become leaner, stronger, more aggressive, fitter, faster, and we default to that's the norm. The girl is going through these changes and drops out of sport. The boy goes through these changes and accelerates. But why? If we look specifically at the changes that are happening in the girl and support that, she might not drop out. So again, it's how are we looking at this and what's causing the change? It's primarily the expression of estrogen and progesterone. Because we see initially that there are more than one type of estrogen, only one type of progesterone, but they all have an interplay. And we're looking at the interplay of how these hormones work together. We can see things like estrogen, really important. It's a woman's testosterone because it affects the structure and the actual synthesis of muscle fiber, the actual stem cell. We see that it's responsible for glucose uptake in the cell for muscle. We also see that it enhances the mitochondrial function. So women are born with and have more robust mitochondria, which is what makes us really endurant and capable of using free fatty acids. We see that it affects the brain. So we see a lot of women who have really bad PMS or PMDD. It has to do with a serotonin drop because the neurotransmitters, serotonin in particular, compete with the same receptors as estrogen. So right before or right after ovulation, before the period starts, we have an upsurge of estrogen and then a sudden drop-off, and the brain is like, whoa, what's going on? And serotonin is not there to take the place of estrogen because it's been waved off by estrogen. So we see all these changes that happen in the brain. We also know that estrogen and progesterone are responsible for bone formation and growth. So when women in their reproductive years lose their menstrual cycle, they become very osteopenic, can potentially become osteoporotic. We're seeing an issue with young recruits coming in that they haven't had the physical activity that most of us had growing up, so they're already on the low end of normal for bone density. from a metabolic standpoint, we also know that estrogen helps with glucose and insulin interplay. We also see that it helps with mobilizing free fatty acids. Progesterone is catabolic. Women need around 12% more protein in the high hormone phase of their menstrual cycle because progesterone's job is to break down and bring amino acids and glucose and things to build a lush endometrial lining. So estrogen helps shuttle stuff away to protect the body while progesterone is trying to bring things in to build stuff. We also see that it works in the brain as neuroprotective, helps with bone, and again, we see it has a metabolic effect. So I bring this into how many people use wearables or follow heart rate variability? Yeah, not very many. Oh, a few. So when we're looking at heart rate variability, we see that it is a sign for stress resilience. But the algorithms in most of the wearables and the way that we're tracking heart rate variability are again written through the male lens and don't take into account progesterone's effect on our autonomic nervous system. So it's really, really difficult for a woman of reproductive years to be in the green or recovery metric 5 days before her period starts when you have a peak of progesterone as it starts to drop off. Because the algorithm is reading this natural change in our autonomic nervous system as a decrease in recovery. Because progesterone increases our respiratory rate, increases our resting heart rate, and drops our heart rate variability. But if we know this, then we can look at trends over time. But most people are unaware of that fact because it's not factored into the education around wearables. So just a brief look, this is your textbook of a 28-day cycle. We know most women are not a 28-day cycle. Contrasting to an oral contraceptive pill. And why I bring this up, because if we're in a sport performance aspect, we really want to know what time of day a woman takes the pill, because if we are going to test her first thing in the morning and she's taking the pill first thing in the morning, the results here are going to be completely different than the dip. So if we're timing our pill intake with when we are doing our testing, we'll get more accurate results. And of course, this is perimenopause. So if we're looking at the fluctuation of estrogen and progesterone going all over the place, and then we get into a new baseline of low estrogen and low progesterone, you can see why perimenopause is so crazy and why people haven't really been talking about it until recently. So we see these cycle changes across a woman's lifespan, but for men, we don't have the same thing. We have variations and fluctuations of testosterone, but testosterone doesn't affect every system in the body like estrogen and progesterone do in the female body. So really, how does this affect training? That's the big thing. We're in a sporting environment. We are at Springfield College. So we think, okay, so we have hormone fluctuation. Does it really affect training or not? So this is where it comes into the complication of we don't have enough research, really. 5 years ago, if you were to ask me that question, I would have said, yeah, definitively. We see from a molecular standpoint that because the low hormone phase, women are more robust. The body's trying to build up to be very good at being able to carry a fertilized egg. So in the low hormone phase, we can do a lot of high intensity work. We recover really well. Our core temperature is lower. And then after ovulation, we see a shift where our core temperature comes up. We need more protein. There's more catabolic responses. And then we have a pro-inflammatory response, and we have a bleed phase. But the caveat is ovulation. More and more women are having more and more anovulatory phases. And each cycle-to-cycle variation is so abstract within a woman, we can't definitively say, for every one, you have to do X in the low hormone phase and Y in the high hormone phase. Plus, we have things like the IUD. We have oral contraceptive pills. We have a natural cycle. So we come down to individual tracking. So understanding how you are across your menstrual cycle is one of the best ways to be able to biohack and understand how you are going to respond to certain training. But the biggest thing I want people to be aware of is that your period is an ergogenic aid. Why I say that is because if you are naturally cycling and getting your period on a regular basis, that means your body is robust enough to take on stress from training and life and still adapt to exercise. The very first thing that starts to change when you're highly stressed, traveling, under-recovered, is the bleed pattern, and then the menstrual cycle length. How would you know that if you didn't track? On an oral contraceptive pill, you don't have the same thing because the sugar pill week is a withdrawal bleed. It's not a true indication of your endocrine health. But if you're tracking how you feel across your active pill cycles, then you have better insight. The other thing is we have this conversation about strength training. So if we know that estrogen is tightly tied to strength training, how do we maximize it for a woman? And why is it so critical? So we know that it's the use of muscular or resistance to build muscular strength. And we have a schematic. We have a power-based end all the way up to our hypertrophy end. And we have conversations within it. But the whole idea of baselining resistance training of wherever you are at whatever age is really to get the benefit of speed and strength, because when we are older or living on our own, we want to be able to pick something up and put it overhead. As we get older, especially as women, we lose those fast twitch and power fibers. One of the very first things that comes to play when someone comes to see me, it's like, I don't understand. My running pace is slowed, and I can't open this jar anymore. And this is before they start getting into kind of signs and symptoms of perimenopause, because that's one of the very first things to go when you start having hormone flux. I also see this in younger athletes who are on the cusp of becoming amenorrheic through low energy availability. So we start to see that they are not recovering as much and they're not progressing in their training. We start looking at their strength and power metrics, like what's going on, because we'll see a change in strength and power metrics before we see a change in their aerobic and anaerobic capacity. So having resistance training and understanding what all goes into it can give really good insight of how we can help our female athletes. So we also know that if someone has low bone density, regardless of age, you want to add strength training. We also, of course, I've already talked about metabolic control. We know joint stability and balance. The other big thing is brain health. We all talk about brain health, and it's becoming more and more apparent the younger we are, the more we need to pay attention to it. One of the best things to do is strength training, because it increases the neuroplasticity and allows the brain to keep understanding and morphing and learning so that you're protecting it, starting now all the way up to when you're 80 or 90. But the biggest thing really is the confidence that it brings. How many people do strength training on a regular basis? That whole side, you have to raise your hands. Yeah. So when you walk out of the gym after a big lift, how do you feel? Right? You feel great. You're taking up space. You feel energized. How do you feel after you do a sprint interval session? For me, I feel demoralized because I can't sprint, but anyway. So there's this confidence thing. So if you're trying to get people involved in activity, then one of the first things you can do is help them build confidence by giving them the ability to lift and to be strong. And trust me, I come from a long-time endurance background. I've raced Ironman, I raced road bikes professionally, I've done Xterra, I've done ultra runs, done all of that really long stuff. And now anything over an hour, I'm like, ugh. So it is a learned thing, and the confidence is great. But with it, you have to understand the environment, right? So if we think about the gendered gym, and even walking around, as great as the weight rooms are, I feel confident walking into the fantastic weight room that's downstairs. But if I were to have my sister with me, she would be backing up, because it's still very masculine and gendered. So we have to understand the environment in which we're placing women to learn resistance training, because ultimately, it is new to most women. Unless you're in your teens, you're involved in all of this kind of conversation, it's still very much a foreign concept to the general population. So we have to be aware of how we are approaching it to get women to come into the gym, to get women to embrace strength training, because we know the benefits that go so far. And it can start really puberty, right? So if we're thinking about all the things that happen during puberty, like I talked about, the widening of the pelvis that comes, changing the Q angle. We see there's a decline in speed and power. We see there's knee instability. We see that there's a change in our center of gravity and also core instability. So we see this with girls going, I can't do anything. Like, I don't feel comfortable in my body. I'm going to drop out. I can't progress. But if we understand this, we can change the sporting culture and we can change the environment to embrace them and say, you know what? Let's take a step back. Let's look at training modifications we can do to teach you how to run, how to land, how to jump, how to throw again with your new mechanics. But if we're thinking about all the younger co-ed soccer teams or even the young girls versus boys, that's not taught because we're still defaulting to what the boys can do. But if we even change a warm-up and allow girls posterior chain to get warmed up first before we go in and do side and cuts and stuff, it reduces the chance of injury, but it also gives them the ability to get stronger just through the warm-up. So we're thinking about functional motion and being able to do some training modifications to work with this new body that is coming. And we're working on technique, we're working on economy of movement, and we're reteaching those fundamental skills. We see that this keeps girls in sport, keeps them engaged. But not only that, we have to think about the sporting culture because we need it to be a safe environment. So if one of you guys over here becomes the coach to like 12, 13-year-old girls, how are you going to approach it when their period comes on one of the first day of practices? I could see their faces like, uncomfortable, right? But if you make it a natural part of your body's changing, these things are happening, and one of the things that also might happen is you might get your period. It becomes normalized. Yes, it's still embarrassing for young girls to say that. They might not even want to talk to their dads about it. But if it becomes normal within the sporting conversation and normal culture, then it's just something that happens. And it's not embarrassing, and we don't have to worry about it. Even if you don't want to talk about it, if you have a drawer of things and you're like, yeah, go for it. There's tampons, there's pads, there's whatever there, and it just is normalized, then it's not embarrassing. And it is part of being a girl and growing up and part of puberty. But then when we get into strength and power in our reproductive years, right? So we hear about phase-based training, and I've kind of just put the kibosh on that. Phase-based training is you only, looking at your own cycle and understanding when you feel fantastic. And if you rock up to the gym on a day where you feel flat, your technique's going to be off. You probably shouldn't be lifting heavy. But if you rock up to the gym and you're like, I'm on fire, then you're going to be able to do really well. And you can find those patterns. When we talk about reps, sets, and hypertrophy, it doesn't matter. What matters is your training history and how well you move. So we don't want you to add load until you can move well. So we hear things about going to failure. We know that reps to failure for women is not as effective as if we stay in the power-based end because women are already endurant. It takes forever to reach failure. So we want to add load to get that muscle stimulation. For men, going to failure doesn't take as long because they're not as endurant, and you can get better hypertrophy from that failure set. So just understanding those nuances. And then when we talk about hormonal contraception, it's yet a different story because it's another hormone profile. We have to understand the type and generation. We have to understand the progestin activity. We also have to understand if a woman is on it for health reasons or if they just don't want to have a period, so they roll the pill pack over. If it's a safe environment and a safe sporting environment, you can have those conversations. Like I said, let's normalize it. It becomes part of the health check. You have players that rock up and you're like, who's injured? Who has an exam? Who's tired? Who's on their period? Who changed their pill? It just becomes one of those natural check-ins. And if it's still too overt to talk about in the room, then maybe you have a checklist where the athlete's going red, yellow, green today, red, yellow, green. So it becomes just an inbred system that's part of the culture. But then we get to that crazy idea of peri and postmenopause, the conversation that is now coming to the forefront. So as embarrassing as it is for these guys to talk about periods in young girls, we have the other end of the room of women who are still afraid to talk about perimenopause and doctors who gaslight them because they don't understand it either. The conversation's changing, and it is okay to say perimenopause. It's fine. Just as we can say, I'll say the word period, we can also say menopause. It's all part of aging. But again, what happens when we talk about puberty and all the changes that happen in puberty, we're having the reverse of that happen in women. And it can start as early as 35, because it's a down regulation of your ovarian hormones that have been working so well for you up to this point, and now things are starting to change. So as I demonstrated earlier, where we have every system of the body that is affected by estrogen and progesterone starting to unwind, every system of the body is affected, and women feel a little bit crazy. They're like, what is going on? The training I was doing last year is not working for me. I'm going to start training more and eating less, is usually the default. Puts them in low energy availability, gives them the offshoot of being osteopenic. I've gotten into the habit now of requesting DEXAs so that I can see when a woman comes in and looks really lean and fit and she's older, I want to see what her bones are like and how much visceral fat she has. Because if we keep doing the same kind of training that we're doing when we get into perimenopause, our body is not going to respond the same. So we have to look for an external stress that's going to take the place of those hormones that used to work so well for us. So this is why we look at if you are already training and you already are consistent, we look to optimize by interjecting some heavy resistance training, some plyometrics, and some high intensity work. Because those three are going to optimize your body's responses to keep you progressing forward. But if you aren't moving, then start moving and work with resistance training first, and then start adding some things in. So why? Because when we see the effect of these flatlining hormones, we know there's an increase in total body inflammation, because estrogen is such a powerful anti-inflammatory agent. We see there's more insulin resistance, again, because estrogen and progesterone work to help control blood glucose. We see there's a decrease in our lipid removal rate, but there's actually no change in lipid uptake. So that means we have a change in our blood lipids. So for a woman who has had normal cholesterol through her entire life, then all of a sudden she's 47, 48, she gets her blood work back, and all of a sudden she's told she has high cholesterol and high LDL, or the bad cholesterol. She's like, what? But I eat well and I train. What's going on? It's because we've had this hormone shift. In order to counter that, we have to look to different types of exercise to be able to clear that cholesterol, reduce the LDL, and improve our actual vascular responses to exercise. And we also have a lot of cognitive changes and mood disorders. So I want to bring it back to estrogen and estrogen's influence on our skeletal muscle. So we see that we have these estrogen receptors on the nucleus. We also see it's in the mitochondria, but for my concern is right here. We're looking at the myosin heavy chain. So we know that myosin and actin bond together to create a really strong muscle contraction, right? So one of the very first things that happens when we start having a change in our estrogen is we have a misstep in the way myosin and actin actually come together. So if we're looking at a misstep, that means that we aren't having as strong of a contraction. We're not having as fast as a contraction either. So this is why I said when we're looking at women who are under-recovered and heading towards amenorrhea, the first thing that goes is power and strength, because they no longer have enough estrogen to stimulate that myosin to work properly. And the same thing happens in perimenopause. So what we want to do is we want to say, okay, so what can we do to make that work for us? We look and we see heavy resistance training, because we get that central nervous system response now that's going to make that work for us. So when we start looking at what's happening specifically, we know that there is something we can do. I've got all these fancies. So ideally, we want to lift heavy shit, right? But we don't want to do that until we move well. So I say it takes good 6 months to a year to learn how to lift a heavy 3 properly. Not only that, we see at any age. So she didn't start lifting weights until she was 70. So it is very possible to gain lean mass and to become strong regardless of your age. The other story I really love is Joan McDonald. So she was, you can read about her full story on her site. Her daughter is a personal trainer and really into the health and fitness world in Canada. Joan was obese, type 2 diabetic, having lots of issues, saw what happened to her husband, went downhill, having the same types of typical sedentary behavior diseases. She said, I don't want that route. Can you help me? And her sister's like, her daughter said, yes, let's get you resistance training. So over the course of 10 years, she went from being obese, sedentary, type 2 diabetic, to being very healthy with lots of lean mass. So her story is amazing. It's never too late to start. So we talk about endurance training, right? So what is endurance training? So we know that for young girls, we want to work on the functionality and the movement. As we start getting older, well, where are we? We can pretty much do whatever we want and still gain aerobic capacity and anaerobic capacity. But when we start getting into peri and postmenopause, we need to really consider what we're doing, because we already are endurant by the nature of being XX. So as I said at the start, we don't want to keep playing to our strengths. And we have this hormone dysfunction because we're losing our hormones. What do? We want to think about strength and power to really build that type 2 fiber, that glycolytic fiber, build some lactate. Because as we're looking at the eye to dementia and Alzheimer's, we know that right now 4.1 million women in this country are diagnosed with Alzheimer's out of 6.5 total. So we know that 2/3 of the people that are diagnosed with Alzheimer's are women. But it's still something that's not exactly known. It's not because we live longer, but we see there's a misstep in brain metabolism and the way that women have been taught to use their brain along the way. If we put in resistance training and work that neuroplasticity, that's one way of helping. The other is lactate. Building lactate. Lactate we know is not a waste product. It's actually used by the heart and the brain. And the more a woman keeps this type 2 fibers and the more anaerobic capacity that she has and the more lactate she's able to produce, the better brain metabolism she has. And it's a way to reduce the cognitive decline and the Alzheimer risk factors. When we talk about the endurance side of things, again, it's that high intensity work that we want, and we want to have less of a focus on that that zone 2 endurance type training. Soul food, sure, but it's not as beneficial for countering what's happening with our bodies from a hormonal perspective. It's also counterintuitive to keep playing to our strengths. So I'm very aware of time, and I always overslide because I get passionate about it. So the last thing I want to bring up is wearables. Because when we're talking about wearables, and everyone has them, from Oura Rings to Whoops to Garmins to Apple Watches, and all the fantastic technology that's coming out, we see that there's a systematic bias in the algorithms. As I was saying with heart rate variability, every algorithm right now that is in a wearable has been based on male physiology. So there's a misstep in even reading heart rate because our beat to beat is different from women to men. And it's not picked up on the algorithm, it's viewed as a default. So we'll see that women don't necessarily get into recovery mode, or the Apple Watch is signaling that she's going into premature ventricular contraction when actually it's just a misstep in the algorithm. So for all wearables, the warning really is just learn from your own data set. Because if we're thinking about how these algorithms are working and how AI is working, if we're looking at the bell curve, it's reading the middle, it's ignoring the two sides and the outliers. Where does women's data sit? As an outlier. Where do different ethnicities sit? In the outliers. So if we are using wearables, don't rely on what the algorithm is telling you. You want to look at trends over time. That's the best way that you can maximize what a wearable is working or doing for you until we can actually get the right algorithms through a female lens. See, I told you I had lots. So when we're looking at the really understanding what is specific to a female athlete, across the board, we're at a situation in our lives right now where I'm like, we're almost in 2026. And we would think that there would be equitable research. We know there isn't. And in the current global political environment, there's still an upsurge of backlash against funding for women's health research. So right now as collective unit, we need men and women in the conversation to understand what research is there, what's available, and how to interpret. We know there's very minimal randomized control trials to really look at everything in sports science. Hasn't been done. But what we can do is we can use the data that's available. We can track our own cycles. We can use the information from our wearables to understand our own trends. We can work with our male coaches to create a better conversation and a better environment, because all of these steps that we lay forward will bring sex differences up to level the playing field. So regardless if you're an athlete, you're a military tactical athlete, wherever you are, if you're just someone who's working in an office who happens to be going through menopause and is having issues, having those conversations is a very first start. Then when we start looking at how do we optimize ourselves, we look at the 4 main pillars, right? Sleep, across the board, doesn't matter if you're a man or woman, nail that sleep. Then we look at physical activity. And you ask yourself, specifically as a woman, because of the lack of really robust data, where am I in my training history? Where am I in my hormone profile in life? And what are my goals? From that, you can look at the data that's there and available and know that when you're 30, you're going to be training differently than someone who's 45. And 45, you're going to be training a little bit differently from someone who's 70. And it's not just the aging factor, it's the hormonal shifts that happen as well. So the other aspect is mindfulness and community. We are not designed to be isolate. We are not designed to be by ourselves. So you need to have community engagement. So if that means you're grabbing a friend and saying, let's go start this resistance training thing I heard about, do it. If you're going, I don't want to get up first thing in the morning and go to practice, set an alarm with a friend. If you need space and mindfulness for your own sanity, go out into green space. Because we see that being out in green space is a much more powerful factor for bringing parasympathetic activity up and allowing you to have peace and a momentary kind of moment than trying to read a book, get on your screens, do meditation. Green space is magic. So get those things nailed first and then start optimizing to minimize the effects of these sex differences. Thank you. Because it could keep going.
So typically we have time for questions, but we're not going to do that. So hopefully, don't hurt me. All right. So
I'll stay at the back.
yeah. Well, first off, we have a plaque for Stacy for the Karpovich lecture. So we'll give that to her first. Get away from the light. All right. And then, so I've heard, I guess it's summer where you are right now, so.
Coming into
it's
it.
coming into it. So she's been cold, so we got to get her back into her letters. So we got her a sweatshirt to wear because she's cold. And then when she gets hot, we got her a nice short sleeve V-neck, so she can stay nice and cool in this one. So Dr. Sims, you have been more than generous with your time. Your knowledge is absolutely outstanding. I think everyone got a lot from this. I know we made the women's basketball team come, and I hope you heard what you heard because we're going to be talking a little bit. But thank you so much. Your knowledge, go to drstacysims.com if you want to know more information, take her classes, read her books, listen to her podcasts. I continue to learn every single time that I listen to your podcast. Thank you so much for your time, and we're proud to have you as an alumnus.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So Stacy will be in the back if you want to get a book, or if you have a book and you want to get it autographed, but we're going to allow her to get back there to do that. And if you do have questions, let's try not to do them in the book line. If people aren't getting things signed, we'll then have her come off of the book line and answer your questions for you individually. Other than that, have a wonderful night. Thank you so much for coming.